Hello, and welcome to this special edition of City Lights Live. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis, and today we are celebrating the publication of a remarkable new book. It is by Nasser Abu Srour. It is titled The Tale of the Wall, Reflections on the Meaning of Hope and Freedom, and it's published by The Other Press. Nasser Abu Srour is of Palestinian descent and is currently a political prisoner, serving a life sentence for 215 years inside an Israeli prison. He was accused of being an accomplice to the murder of an Israeli intelligence officer at the time of the first Intifada. He was captured, tortured, and forced to confess, after which he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. While incarcerated, Nasser Abu Srour obtained a bachelor's degree in English from Bethlehem University and a master's degree in political science from Al-Quds University. The Tale of a Wall is his first book to appear in English. The Tale of a Wall is a truly remarkable book. It goes far beyond what one would think of as a memoir. It is written in a very lyrical style, at times emoting a surrealistic kind of an aura. Nasser Abu Srour is a master storyteller. He takes the experiences of trauma, which would have broken most people, and transforms them. The Tale of a Wall not only stands as witness to the injustice perpetrated on the Palestinian people, but delves deep into the pathology of trauma itself, how it shapes our lives, how one man has performed a kind of an alchemical process by the means of his imagination to transform a horrific situation into a way of transcending it. At its core, this is a book about the nature of freedom. And The Other Press has performed a great service bringing this really important work to light. With us today for our program is Nasser Abu Srour's translator, Luke Leafgren, and his publisher, Judith Gurewich. Luke Leafgren is an assistant dean of Harvard College. He has translated 7 novels from Arabic, including Muhsin al-Rameli's The President's Garden, for which he received a 2018 Saif Gubash Banipal Prize for Arabic Literary Translation. Judith Gurewich is the award-winning publisher of The Other Press. She is also a practicing Lacanian psychoanalyst. The Other Press publishes exceptional literary fiction and nonfiction. They have published the works of such authors as Sarah Bakewell, Ben Okri, and Kamel Daoud, amongst others. Welcome to you both. It is wonderful to have you with us. Such an honor. I was hoping we could begin by hearing the words of Nasser Abu Srour himself. Luke, would you please read us an example of his prose?
Thanks so much, Peter. I'd be happy to. And I'm holding the new edition in my hand. It just came out. Got my copies in the mail the other day. It's beautiful, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about this work with you. I'll read 2 short passages from the beginning. The first one is the prologue. Thus spoke the wall. Dear reader, at first glance, it may appear that the pages you hold in your hands are the timid offering of an imprisoned man who decided, after long hesitation, to take the plunge and write. But no, this is not my story. I am merely a witness, providing my testimony to the events that I have seen and heard. This is the story of a wall that somehow chose me as the witness to what it said and did. The sentences of this text could not have been composed without the support of that single solid source, the wall. They would have broken apart and scattered to the winds, but for the wall's abiding grace. Since the beginning of my journey, the wall has given me all my defining traits and all the names I have been known by, in the camp, on the outskirts of the city, in prison, and in the heart of a woman. I am the voice of this wall. This is how it decided to speak. It is a prison narrative, with all the illness, chaos, and confusion of such a tale. This text is not the child of any late-night discussion in some intellectual cafe, seated around a table crowded with drinks and stories. No, it was birthed from the womb of a concrete wall, a wall so hard it barely shows the words I etch upon it. It is a text born of iron and concrete. I'll skip ahead to the beginning of the first chapter, letting go and holding fast. That describes the genesis of this literary memoir. 2 weeks ago, I emerged from an extended bout of apathy and decided to read a book by Kierkegaard. In the book, he talks about love, arguing that the best way to preserve it is to release the beloved and to deny all possessive instincts such as dependency and egotism. He also claimed that this letting go is only possible through the irrationality of faith. Reading that piece was not easy for me. My prison cell was suddenly filled with the question of how. The cell had to expand to create room for the flood of questions that surged from the man's argument. That kind of stretching was something my cell did only rarely, and I never knew if it was for my sake or for its own. After an hour, the doors were still closed and locked, yet somehow being locked up with those questions became an invitation to seek possible answers.
I would like to begin our discussion with you, Judith. I mean, how did you come to publish this book, and what is the story of its publication?
Oh, okay. With pleasure, I will tell you that story. So I publish a lot of books from around the world. I mean, that's really my mission, to find works that teach us something we don't know, and it's told in a way that we can't put down, books that we can't put down, but yet teaches us as we go along. And one person who was particularly good at providing me these books was an agent in France called Pierre Astier, who had lived in Algeria, and he introduced me to a lot of African and North African authors. And one day we're having coffee, and I said, I have all these fascinating books coming from you, and there is no Palestinian work. And as a Jew, I have been publishing critical books critical books on Israel for, let's say, since 2004. Actually, my first book, literally my second book, that I published after I was done publishing psychoanalytic books, was a book called Breaking Ranks, a soldier who refused to fight in the Second Intifada. And so from early on, I had a feeling that something was rotten, in the promised land, and I wanted to expose it because I felt that in a way it was betraying my heritage. So it was not particularly surprising that I somehow decided was enough by having, intelligent Jewish journalists to write on Israel. It was time to find some Palestinian author as well. And Pierre Astier said, I'm really ashamed to say I don't have any, but I'll work on it. And literally 2 days later, Olive Lasnay called him and said, oh, well, she works for publisher Perspective, and she works and also New Lines. I mean, she's a very, very active journalist, very involved in Palestine. And she also does documentary, and she works both with Africa and the Middle East. And she heard of a book that had been published in Lebanon. That was Nasser's book, and it was a book in Arabic. And she said, it's a very good book, I think. It's a friend of mine who published it. I think you should have a look. Of course, how can I have a look? And as luck would have it, I have a friend in Cambridge whose father, who's Palestinian, whose father is an avid reader, and who had read my books on Israel, actually, and was very keen on other press. And so I knew that he understood where I was coming from. And he read the book in 24 hours. And he told me it's non-negotiable. I take upon myself that you have to buy that book. And then I was lucky enough to find Luke through a friend who was another very, very renowned translator, who Luke will tell you the name of because I forgot. And Luke and I, we figured out we lived very close to each other because Luke also lives in Cambridge as a professor at Harvard. He teaches at Harvard. So we start working together on the, I mean, I didn't work. I mean, Luke did all the hard work, and I read it over with him. And that's how it came together. That's how I discovered it. And then there were all kind of other things that were incredible that happened after that, which is that it is the first book in 20 years that I sold to Gallimard.
Wow.
I also sold it to Feltrinelli and to Penguin Random House. And also Galaxia Gutenberg in Spain. So, the book took off very quickly after Luke's magical translation. Nadia, the love of his life and his lawyer, she has been prevented to see him since October 7th, it's been an absolute nightmare. Before that, she went to visit him on a regular basis. And one time I went with her to the Negev. I wasn't able to go in, but I wanted him to know I came all the way. And that time she could see him and report to him what we were doing. Now, and so I was very keen because we had all these good news, including our interview today with you. We wanted to pass on because a lot of reviews are in the works. And I wanted him to know, because what else is there for him to make him happy than to know that he can be seen around the world? So I promptly called Nadia and sent her all the information I could gather to pass it on. And she went to visit him. He had been moved from one prison to another because since October 7, as you know, the treatment of Palestinian prisoners has been absolutely atrocious. And she told me that for the first time in 31 years, she saw him behind a glass wall, of course, a glass, shield. And for the first time ever, he was handcuffed, his feet were attached with chain, and his hand and feet were connected with another chain, and he had lost like 15 kilos. So this is something so absolutely incredible that, someone who's been in prison already for 31 years, was supposed to be released twice after the Oslo Accord and was kept in for absolutely incomprehensible reason is quite shocking. I also want to tell you something else before we move into the depth and intelligence and insight of the book, is that I always was extremely suspicious about what brought him to have a life sentence, almost a death sentence, a life sentence. And so I hired one of the most famous human rights lawyers in Israel, Mikhail Sfard. And because what I wanted to find out was what were the record of the trial, because he wasn't tried alone. He was tried with his cousin, who was part of this trapping of this officer who had tried. I mean, the reason why this IDF officer was trapped and how he was killed, which was, I think, also not clear why, how it happened and how, was it self-defense or not? We don't know. What happened exactly. But what is clear is that he was, because he confessed on the torture, he was very quickly tried, not in a military court, but in a regular criminal court in Israel, together with his cousin. So when I bought the book and I got all kind of, snotty requests of why was he in prison, as if that's the most important thing. That he's a bad person, and so that has to come before his writing, his literary masterpiece. I thought I wanted to get that down. I wanted to really know what was in that, what happened. So Michael Sfard went to look for the file. And it took a long, long time. And I kept on asking him, where is it? It's coming. Yes, yes, yes. We have an appointment. And then he wrote to me, he says, well, just a few days before our appointment, we were told that the file had been destroyed. So there was no trace of that file. So I said, well, that's an extremely interesting story that I could bring to some international court, as I have good connection at Harvard in that field. And he said, let me look at it again. Then they said, well, maybe it wasn't destroyed. It's somewhere, we'll have to find it. And of course, we haven't heard. But that was, to me, quite an interesting story as well. So this is there are two standards,
Yeah.
A Palestinian can't do, is by definition a murderer and a criminal and a terrorist, and Israeli are free to kill whoever they want, and it's fine. It's always self-defense.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about the motif of the wall and what it means to both of you, because it's just it's such a powerful image. As a companion, to the author, but a greater metaphor for all of us at this point, because look at what's happening in the U.S. along the border here. As we've gone through these cycles in this country of putting these walls up and and imprisoning people and now making money, turning it into an enterprise, if you would. So if you could both maybe begin with you, Luke.
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Peter. It's it's right there in the title, and it intrigued me when I first picked up this book. What is this about? What does it mean that there's the tale of a wall? Is it a tale about a wall? Yes. Um, in the first page, Nasser also tells us it's a tale by the wall, what the wall is telling us, and the wall in some way speaking through Nasser, and he's a witness to everything that he's seen and experienced in prison over these past 30 years. Um, so it's an incredible, intriguing literary device, but it's also an example of Nasser's creativity and resilience. He speaks very eloquently about how in the chaos of his life being turned upside down and in the chaos of being beaten in prison and being transferred from one place to another, um, he realized that he would lose himself if he didn't have something to hold on to. And so this wall became the enduring metaphor for um, getting past or getting through, getting out in some way of the hopelessness of his situation and seeing beyond it. He, inverts the very thing that's oppressing him and turns it into the source of his own strength. So that's, that was one of the many things that impressed me about the character of Nasser and his creativity and his determination and resilience. Maybe I could pass it to Judith. I know that this is also an idea that's spoken to you too.
Yes, it's, I didn't think about it right away, but the more I was rereading the book, the more I realized that what Nasser was doing was to find another, because when we talk, we always talk to another, and we hear what we say through how the other sends us back the message we have sent. There's no other way to talk than you don't talk to yourself, you talk to someone who you want them to hear you. So for him to talk to the wall is both, it's both a block and an open door. And it's an open door in the sense that, okay, I'm going to be able to hear back what I'm saying and what I'm writing. And I see in the words I write something that I send to my wall and my wall is sending back to me. So I can check in a way what I've said because he's sending it back. The wall is sending it back to me. So it becomes to him a way to not to disrupt the possibility of intersubjectivity, which of course is the main thing that's being removed when you're alone in a cell. So you still have another to talk to who sends you back what you've said in an inverted form in a way. And I think it's like he instinctively discovered, Lacanian's concept of the symbolic order. For those who know, a lot of your listener, I'm sure, had studied literary criticism in university, and they would know about that. But if you haven't, it's pretty much what I've said, that you have to get what you say being filtered and then sent back. So maybe it's not exactly what you said that comes back, but something that comes back makes you feel confident that that's what you have to rely upon. I know it's a little confusing what I'm saying, but it's really about the root of how intersubjectivity function and how, in a way, we keep alive, what Rousseau has called the social contract. We are subject, and the way we relate to others is through words. And when that contract is broken, and then when words don't attempt to mean what they really are trying to say, something's terribly wrong in our world, which is, of course, what's happening on the other side of the wall, which is Israel.
Mm-hmm. I was really struck. There's a metaphysical dimension to his writing that struck me right away, and the idea of transformation, of how you take a really terrible situation and find a way to completely change it using the imagination, and essentially this is about freedom. What we're looking at, and I think it's something that can also be transferred outside of the prison. And I think what he's doing is also sharing with the rest of us and reminding us how in many ways we're in prison, prisons of the mind.
Beautiful.
If you could comment on that, what are your, thoughts about that?
Go ahead, Luke.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that, Peter. It's a fascinating idea, and he has so much to share based on his experience. And as you say, he finds freedom in the least likely place, and it's the only way that he finds that he can survive. He sees people who don't succeed, who don't find a way to survive the situation that they're in. And the way that he does it is through deep learning. He's an incredible reader, and he shows us that on every page. History, philosophy, psychology, literature, both Arabic literature, and I think he reads a lot of Russian literature as well in the 1990s in prison. And all of that gets brought into his interpretation of, as he surveys the history of the Palestinian movement and the struggle for freedom and self-determination, and then ways that movement fails or is betrayed. And it's it has a lot to offer. His particular perspective, the lens through which he sees that history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I it's exactly right. And because I just came back from there now, I am stunned as what a prophetic quality his work is, because he was the first, in a way, he went back to the roots of the occupation and the impact of the occupation on people, especially in refugee camps, where you really don't have the opportunity to develop a life. And I've said that a few times before in other interviews, but there's something very striking in how he explains how life in the refugee camp prevents children to make a distinction between the past, the present, and the future. And he gives a very profound and philosophical analysis of how the Intifada, because it was a movement of resistance, restored the sense of past, present, and future in people. But at the same time, he really pondered over the history of how the Palestinian resistance movement were created. He also felt where there were mistakes made, but he also understood that there was not much choice, and to be, philosophical in your strategies of resistance were not obvious. So at the same time, he explains, criticizes, and understands. And he really is very, very objective and offers insights that nobody thought about at the time, And today, what he described has remained and has become worse. We're talking about 31 years ago. And yesterday, literally, no, the day before yesterday, I was taken by a taxi, a very intelligent Palestinian taxi driver who spoke very well, very good English, and he drove me from Ramallah to the airport in Tel Aviv, because as a Jew, it's easy for me to leave in Kohen, which is incredibly unfair. And I have an interesting anecdote to tell you about this too. And this taxi driver took a special road because of the war. There are all kind of checkpoints and disaster. He was worried I would miss the plane, so he took a different road. And that different road exposed me to new settlements. He said there were caravans, and now the actual cities in various hills. And then he showed me a Palestinian village on the left as we were driving. So it was this Palestinian village. He said, this is a village where people live on culture. They make vegetables and fruit, and then they take these fruits and vegetables and take them to the market to sell them, and that's how they survive. And then he showed me a barrier that was closed. The only road for the villager to get out is closed by a barrier, a red barrier. I'll never forget that red barrier. And there was nobody there. It was 7 in the morning. He says, well, the soldiers are not there yet. This barrier cannot be open until the soldier comes in and check on everyone who gets out. So people in that village are prisoners. So they are not allowed to go sell their tomatoes and their incredible, vegetables that they have there and their fruits. They're not allowed to go to the market to survive. They have to wait for the soldiers to come to open that barrier. And what they do is they try with monkeys, they go on to, sorry, not monkeys, donkeys, they go on donkeys and carry their fruit on the back of the donkeys to try to go sell them. And then they take risk of being shot by the soldiers if they see them come out. And this is, there is a genocide in Gaza, but this is life for so many years in the occupied territory. This is how it works. Every detail of everyday life is controlled. And all these interventions are happening all the time. So imagine you are in the head of a Palestinian dealing with this kind of occupation that is not only an occupation, but also a form of, personal sadism, inflicted on every individual. And he saw all that, he understood all that. And he also understood why they were doing it at the time, 31 years ago. The rationale was maybe a little bit more coherent than it is now. And this is, so when you read this book and you see exactly how he projected what was going to happen in the future. So I'm not sure I'm explaining it very well, but having that book in my head and having the experience of seeing this barrier, and people behind that village who knew they would not allowed to get out to go sell their vegetables. It was quite shocking.
I wonder if I could share a passage that, Judith, you started talking about the way in which Nasser could see how time and place are become disjointed through the occupation, and people are separated from a sense of the past, from the land. He talks a lot about the stories that people tell and how they understand themselves and others. And there's a passage that brings a lot of that together that I'd like to read. Every story has three elements: time, place, and characters, as well as some question that ties the three together. But the camp possessed no time or place to form the necessary elements of its narrative. Long decades of occupation had severed the connection between time and place, which floated off in opposite directions. For those forced to leave their homes, either in the first Nakba or the second, the hands of time had frozen in place. They hung their watches like keys above the tent door in case heaven might send a second Passover at nightfall, a second exodus to free them from their wretched wandering in the wilderness of exile. Now that the sense of time was lost, events could only be defined as pre-Nakba or post-Nakba. Everything they sowed, half of what they reaped, anything they left in the ground, whatever the birds ate, all that was pre-Nakba. Everything they were unable to plant, whatever they were incapable of reaping, and all that they denied the birds, that was the post-Nakba era. When place ceases to move through time, it watches young souls carrying grandmothers on their shoulders, together with everything they can load upon their backs, and it fears a universal explosion that scatters the dust without any possibility for a resurrection. It's a passage that, as captures in his lyrical, kind of philosophical way, the experience of living in the refugee camp, and brings in these elements of the Jewish narrative, of the Christian narrative, of the Palestinian story of exile and the Nakba in 48 and again in 67.
What it evokes for me is thinking a lot about the pathology of trauma and how this book really is just tackles it head on. I'm thinking, how do we approach something as tremendous as this, as what has happened? Thinking about the mechanisms involved, in something like genocide and something like, systematized control of this sort. But, this is a model, I think, that you can see is sort of like a virus that has sort of escaped and is traveling around the planet. I mean, I think we see this in Ukraine, and I'm just thinking about how it's also about seeing, really. It's like sometimes we don't really see what's in front of us. And I wonder how much of that now is because of the fact that we're all focused on phones so much, and that our field of vision is actually narrowing, and that we haven't had a chance to, like, over centuries, we were out in the, prairies, the fields, wherever, the desert even, and we're looking for water or food or who's a friend, who's an enemy. And now our field of vision is narrowing. And this very pernicious, very dangerous thing, I think, about that process that allows other things to kind of, emerge. If we could talk a little bit about maybe the pathology of trauma and how we, find ways to heal it, using maybe this book as a kind of a, a starting point.
That's an amazing point you're making. I was just thinking about the barrier versus the genocide. Here I was, not far, and I can't get that red barrier out of my head because I can't conceptualize the genocide which was next door, right? It's the same. So much to say, Peter. I don't know where to start. Let's focus on Nasser for a minute, and before we move on to the pathology of trauma. As an analyst, so much to say, but I don't really feel that I know more than Nasser. I think I know nothing compared to Nasser. So what he succeeded to do is the power. What do we have? What is the best part of human nature? I mean, it's a good old Freudian concept. It's to sublimate, right? So Nasser's incredible ability to think with words and to put them down and transform his pain into beauty is, of course, the foundation of it all. I mean, people are able to do that. I always use the term, people who are able to go to the University of Trauma and not be destroyed by it end up much beyond us. Because if you're able to transcend, the death drive and get to a place where you can put those experiences, this atrocious experience into words, you won. I mean, who can beat you to that, right? So that's really the issue. And if we stay with Nasser, I would say that's what he gives us. There's also the love affair. We shouldn't forget about his incredible love affair, which in a way interfered with his ability to sublimate.
Mm. No.
If I could pick that up, one of the chapters talks about, one of the chapters is entitled Pain. And it's about like the existence of physical pain and when does pain become suffering. And, what Nasser says is the way that he succeeded where he saw other prisoners struggling was that he did not look away from his pain. It became an object of curiosity, and he kind of settled into it and explored it and examined it. And he also didn't expect it to go away. It's like when you expect it to end is when you begin to suffer, because it doesn't. Whereas he, by giving up that expectation of improvement, he can, it's his way of surviving. And I think going back to your question, Peter, about what we see and what we don't, what is so helpful for me about this book and a chance to work on it is hearing an individual story allows a chance to focus when that's so hard to do, both in the world of technology and all the distractions that we have, but then also in a moment when the level of trauma is so overwhelming. When over 30,000 Gazans have been killed, every one of them having a story, but without any individual story, we can't get our mind around the enormity of things that are happening.
It's a very good point, I think.
Yeah. And of course, Nasser is just an excellent storyteller. And stylistically speaking, just the way that's so lyrical, the way that the book flows. I'm wondering, when you were translating, what were some of the challenges in kind of, maintaining that integrity, into English?
Translation is a wonderful, I don't know, I discovered translation in my 30s. It's not something I expected to do, and it has become so meaningful in my life. It was very exciting when I got an email from Other Press in the summer of 2022 saying that they have this project and would I be interested in taking a look. And One of the things that struck me first looking at the PDF that they sent was the range of like genres. It's quite a distinct book, and unlike others that I've found. And so it was very intriguing to work on a project like this that has so much philosophical reflection and psychological unpacking, and then kind of historical and autobiographical narrative. But then he works in his own poetry, and in the second half of the book, it shifts entirely to the story of a lawyer who begins visiting him, and they fall in love. And as Judith mentioned earlier, this almost it's a problem in the way that it destabilizes the security and the stability that he had when he started thinking about maybe there is life beyond the prison, maybe there is a life with this person that he's falling in love with. But the variety of the book allowed, it was a lot of hard work between, I guess, September and January to make a rough draft of this, and kind of working every day. But the distinctions between one section and another was actually helpful. It's not the same thing for all 4 months. You can work on one part, then you can work on another, and like the dialogues and the letters that the lovers are sending to each other is very different than analyzing what was happening in the peace process in 2012 and 2013, when Nasser is almost released, when all the pre-Oslo prisoners were promised to be released, and then he's one of a handful that aren't. So that, I think, was helpful in the translation process.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is such a remarkable book, and I'm hoping that our viewers will get a chance to pick up a copy and really dive into it and absorb it and enjoy it, and process it. It's really a very, very special document. And I think other press, knows a good thing when they see it. Judith, thank you for doing this. It was, a great service, I believe. And Luke, to your translation, congratulations. I mean, this is really a wonderful achievement, and it's been a great honor having the both of you with us here today. And we hope to see you again very, very soon.
The honors. We are the one who are honored.
Yeah.
Really.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us and giving us a chance for this conversation, Peter.
Sure.